The Storm Prediction Center has issued a Day 2 slight risk here in the Northeast. So let me show you what you can expect in terms of severe weather. So going over to the REFS, where we're currently viewing the CAPE, which is the convective available energy. So essentially this is the fuel storms need to produce severe weather. So the more energy within the atmosphere, which is measured in joules per kilogram, the higher chance of severe weather there is. So we go on, and then you can see by late morning, instability starts to rise as CAPE values start to go up. So around 3 p.m., there's a pocket of areas which have around 1,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE, which is enough to support severe weather. So we continue to let this play out, and once you get past 4 p.m., the high values of CAPE needed to support severe weather are just gone, where then you're stuck with around 500 joules per kilogram of CAPE, which isn't all that supportive for severe weather. Now we're looking at the storm relative helicity at the 0 to 3 kilometer level. So this is essentially showing how much low-level shear is there for any storms that form to actually try and produce a tornado or do tornadogenesis. So we don't have any real high values in the slight risk area, where we do have some pocket of around 100-ish to around 200 here in parts of PA, Ohio, New York, and West Virginia. But apart from that, there isn't going to be much storm relative helicity available, which will lower the overall tornado threat. Going over to temperatures, this is where we can identify more on what would any storms actually form as, on if they would end up being tall, elevated storms, more surface space, and be able to produce tornadoes, stuff like that. So we see that there's an area here in the Northeast where temperatures will be near or around the 90s. Essentially, this corridor of outline isn't going to see too much severe weather because of the spread between the temperature and dew point. Where because the temperature is so high, if we go over to dew point, what ends up happening is, since the dew point is in the 50s, because of that, there's a huge spread. So we have 91 in Lancaster for temperature at 3 p.m. compared to 56 here in Lancaster at 3 p.m. for dew point. So essentially that's a 30 to 40 degree difference between the two, which is essentially saying that any storms that do form will end up being elevated. Where then, when we go to the more western part, you see that they have lower temperatures where it's in the 70s to low 80s. Where then when we look at the dew points, they are much closer to what the temperature is, where there's around a 20 degree difference, which still means that they're going to be elevated, but they have just an ever so slightly better chance at seeing more surface-based tornadic storms. Looking at the shear at the 0 to 1 kilometer level, you can see that all this is more elevated levels of shear. where this will help support more long-lasting storms as well as support supercells, since this will get rotation going within storms. But once we go to the 0 to 6 kilometer level for shear, essentially there'll be nothing here in parts of eastern and central PA, where then in Ohio, West Virginia, and western PA, there'll be a lot of 0 to 6 kilometer level shear, where this will help this area have more long-lasting supercells than over in eastern and parts of central PA. Going over to simulated reflectivity, you can see around noon is when storms begin to form within the slight risk area. We have a pocket in PA and then a pocket in Ohio. So we continue letting this play out, where then eventually it becomes more of a line of storms, which will then go through before being followed up around 7 p.m. There'll be storms that'll be behind all of this, which will go through and bring extra rainfall. Before then, all that will be left is a few scattered storms. So this is why the Storm Prediction Center has put out a slight risk of severe weather, as this is mostly driven by a 15% wind probability within a 25-mile radius, as well as a little pocket of 15% hail probability within a 25-mile radius. But there is a small area that they've highlighted which has a 2% chance of seeing a tornado within a 25-mile radius, but the odds of there being any tornadoes are extremely low. So that's it for the video. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe. Yeah, see you in the next video.